Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Where manicured hedges and gated drives conceal secrets so volatile they threaten to detonate entire bloodlines, and at the center of that quiet storm stands Madison, restless and unraveling, unaware that the truth she has spent her entire life avoiding is already moving toward her like an oncoming train, because what begins as a routine hospital visit, one last follow-up, one final signature on adoption paperwork she never thought she'd revisit, spirals into the most shocking revelation the town has seen since the Dupree dynasty first cracked, when a nurse hesitates just a beat too long before handing Madison a sealed file marked Maternal History Confidential, a file that Madison insists she doesn't want, doesn't need, has lived decades without. But the universe, cruel and relentless, has other plans, because moments later Madison overhears two doctors whispering in the corridor, their voices low but urgent, discussing a woman recently admitted under an alias, a woman whose medical markers match Madison's own so precisely it defies coincidence, and suddenly Madison's pulse races, her hands tremble, and she knows, that fate has just reached through time and yanked her forward into a truth that was never meant to stay buried. Meanwhile, across town, Nicole senses the shift before anyone else does. That familiar tightening in her chest warning her that another long-hidden secret is clawing its way to the surface, and when Madison calls her, voice shaking, asking questions she's never dared ask before, about closed records, sealed names, erased pasts, Nicole tries to steer her away, tries to protect her. But the damage is already done because Madison has already seen the name listed under emergency contact for the mysterious patient, and that name detonates in her mind like a bomb. Claudette Rowe, a woman Madison recognizes not from family lore or whispered half-truths, but from scandal, from disgrace, from a face once plastered across headlines tied to betrayal, fraud, and a devastating fall from grace that shook Fairmont Crest to its core years ago. A woman Madison has crossed paths with before without ever realizing the blood that binds them. A woman who once stood across a courtroom from Nicole herself. A woman no one ever suspected was capable of motherhood, let alone sacrifice. The reveal comes brutally, without softness or mercy. When Madison storms into the hospital room unannounced, the door swinging open to reveal Claudette pale and weakened in the bed, yet unmistakable, her sharp eyes widening in recognition not of a stranger, but of a mirror, because the resemblance is undeniable now that it's impossible to ignore. The same jawline, the same defiant posture even in illness, and time seems to freeze as Claudette whispers Madison's name, her name, confirming the impossible truth before Madison can even speak it aloud. And in that instant Madison's entire life fractures, every memory reframed, every belief questioned, because the woman she has been taught to despise, the woman blamed for so much pain in this town, is her birth mother, and Claudette's confession spills out in gasping fragments, how she was young and trapped and terrified, how powerful people demanded silence, how the adoption was never meant to be permanent but became irreversible after one catastrophic mistake, how Madison was taken not out of love but out of fear, and how Claudette watched from a distance for years, too ashamed and too dangerous to ever step forward. The fallout is immediate and explosive as Madison recoils, fury overtaking shock, accusing Claudette of abandoning her, of choosing ambition and survival over motherhood, while Claudette fires back that Madison has no idea what it cost her to walk away, no idea who threatened her, no idea how close Madison came to being destroyed by the same forces that ruined her life. And just when emotions reach a breaking point, Nicole arrives, stunned into silence by the sight before her. Forced to confront her own buried guilt for knowing more than she ever admitted, for helping keep Claudette's secret to protect Madison's future, a choice that now feels like betrayal no matter how noble it once seemed. Word spreads like wildfire through Fairmont Crest as whispers ripple from mansion to mansion, alliances shift overnight, and old enemies re-emerge smelling blood. Because Claudette Rowe's return doesn't just rewrite Madison's origin story, it reopens investigations, revives grudges, and threatens to expose a web of corruption involving doctors, judges, and donors who believed the past was safely sealed. And as Madison spirals between rage and longing, torn between the woman who raised her and the woman who gave her life, she is forced to confront the most painful question of all: whether blood demands forgiveness or whether some betrayals cut too deep to ever heal, while Claudette, fragile yet unbroken, vows that she didn't survive this long to lose her daughter. Again, setting the stage for a war of truth that will test loyalties, shatter legacies, and prove once and for all that in Fairmont Crest, the past never stays buried. It waits, it watches, and when it finally comes knocking, no one escapes unscathed. The shock doesn't end there. It metastasizes, spreading through Fairmont Crest like a slow poison, because the morning after Madison's world shatters, the town wakes up to whispers that refuse to stay whispers, and suddenly Claudette Rowe's name is everywhere again, spoken in hushed tones over brunch tables and shouted behind closed doors, her return dredging up memories people swore they'd buried for good, and Madison, hollow-eyed and sleepless, finds herself trapped in a nightmare where every street corner feels familiar yet hostile, because now every smile carries curiosity, every glance carries judgment, and every silence screams the same question: what does this make her now? Madison tries to retreat, to ground herself in the life she knows, but the ground itself keeps shifting beneath her feet, especially when Nicole finally tells the rest of the truth, confessing that Claudette didn't just disappear all those years ago. She was erased, legally and socially, after stumbling onto financial and political secrets that implicated people still very much in power today, people who ensured that Claudette's pregnancy became leverage, that Madison's adoption became a transaction, and that silence became the price of survival, a revelation that reframes everything Madison thought she knew about her own beginnings and ignites a fury she can barely contain, because her life wasn't just shaped by fate, it was engineered by corruption. Claudette, meanwhile, grows stronger by the day. No longer the fragile patient Madison first encountered, but a woman reclaiming her sharp edges, her voice gaining steel as she warns Madison that the people responsible for tearing them apart are already mobilizing, already spinning narratives to discredit her again, already laying traps that could destroy Madison too, if she's not careful, and that warning proves prophetic when a leaked document suddenly appears online, painting Claudette as unstable and manipulative, while subtly questioning Madison's legitimacy, her inheritance prospects, and even her mental health, a coordinated attack so precise it becomes clear this isn't gossip, it's strategy. Madison is furious, but she's also terrified, because the life she's fought to build suddenly feels conditional, and the more she digs, the more she realizes how many doors quietly close when your origins threaten powerful people, forcing her to confront an impossible choice: distance herself from Claudette to protect her future, or stand beside her birth mother and risk losing everything she's worked for. Tensions explode when Madison confronts several Fairmont Crest elites at a charity gala meant to celebrate unity, but instead erupts into thinly veiled accusations and icy confrontations, with Claudette watching from the shadows, proud yet fearful, knowing her daughter's defiance mirrors her own past mistakes. And the moment crystallizes when Madison publicly refuses to denounce Claudette, her words ringing through the room like a declaration of war, signaling that she will no longer be quietly managed or conveniently erased. The consequences come fast and brutal as funding is pulled, partnerships dissolve, and Madison realizes just how fragile her standing always was, built on foundations she never consented to, while Claudette finally confesses the darkest truth of all: that Madison's father wasn't just absent, he was dangerous. A man whose influence still echoes through Fairmont Crest, a man who believed power entitled him to erase consequences, including a child, and whose name Claudette has spent decades too afraid to speak aloud. That confession cracks something open in Madison, not just rage but resolve, because suddenly her story isn't just about abandonment or identity, it's about survival, legacy, and reckoning, and as mother and daughter stand on opposite sides of a mirror that once kept them apart, they begin to see each other not as mistakes or ghosts, but as fighters shaped by the same fire. setting the stage for a collision course with the very forces that thought they'd won long ago, because in Fairmont Crest, secrets don't die quietly. They wait for the right moment to demand blood, truth, and justice, and Madison's journey has only just begun. And just when Fairmont Crest believes it has absorbed the worst of the shock, the truth sharpens its teeth and bites again, because Madison's refusal to disappear quietly triggers a cascade of consequences no one fully anticipated, starting with the sudden reopening of sealed court records from decades ago, records someone forgot to destroy, which reveal that Madison's adoption was fast-tracked under emergency authority signed by a judge who, it turns out, was later quietly removed from the bench. Under mysterious circumstances, a revelation that sends legal tremors through the community and forces Nicole to confront the horrifying possibility that Madison's entire legal identity rests on a foundation riddled with fraud, coercion, and fear, and as Madison learns this, the ground beneath her doesn't just crack, it collapses, leaving her questioning whether the life she has lived is truly hers or merely a carefully curated illusion designed to keep powerful men safe. Claudette, sensing the walls closing in once more, urges caution, but Madison is done being cautious, done being protected into silence, and she begins asking questions no one wants to answer, tracking down former hospital staff, retired attorneys, and forgotten aides who suddenly remember things they swore they'd forgotten, each conversation peeling back another layer of rot, another confirmation that Madison wasn't just given away, she was strategically removed. And the deeper Madison digs, the clearer it becomes. That her existence threatened to expose a network of influence that extended far beyond Fairmont Crest, implicating donors, politicians, and even beloved community leaders whose carefully polished reputations now wobble under the weight of long-buried sins. Tensions between Madison and Nicole reached a breaking point when Madison accuses her of choosing safety over truth, of loving her enough to raise her but not enough to fight for her origins, and Nicole, shattered and defensive, admits that she believed silence was the only way to keep Madison alive, a confession that doesn't heal the wound but finally gives it a name, forcing both women to reckon with the uncomfortable truth that love, when mixed with fear, can still do devastating harm. Meanwhile, Claudette's past refuses to stay behind her as an old adversary resurfaces with damning footage from years ago, threatening to release it unless Claudette walks away from Madison for good, a demand that pushes Claudette to the brink. Because for the first time in her life, survival would mean sacrificing the one thing she never stopped loving, and in a moment that echoes the pain of decades past, Claudette prepares to disappear again, only to be stopped by Madison herself, who makes it clear that abandonment will no longer be Claudette's burden to carry alone, declaring that if the truth destroys them, then so be it, because living a lie has already cost them too much. The turning point comes when Madison uncovers the identity of her biological father, not through confession, but through evidence, documents, payments, threats, and silenced witnesses, all pointing to a man still revered in Fairmont Crest, a man whose smile graces plaques and scholarships, a man whose power once ensured Claudette's erasure and Madison's removal, and when Madison confronts him privately, the encounter is chilling not for its drama, but for its calm, because he doesn't deny her, doesn't apologize, and doesn't threaten her instead, offering protection, privilege, and legacy in exchange for her silence, a bargain that crystallizes everything Madison has come to understand about this town, about power, and about herself, and she walks away knowing that the war ahead won't just be fought in courtrooms or headlines, but in hearts, families, and identities, as Fairmont Crest braces for a reckoning it can no longer outrun. Because Madison is no longer searching for where she came from, she's deciding what she's willing to burn, to make sure the truth finally survives. And yet the reckoning refuses to crest quietly, because once Madison walks away from that chilling offer, the machinery of Fairmont Crest shifts into a more dangerous gear, subtle at first, then unmistakable, as phone calls go unanswered, invitations vanish, and whispers harden into coordinated resistance, signaling that Madison has crossed an invisible line that few ever dare to approach, let alone step over. And the pressure mounts when an anonymous source leaks a distorted version of Claudette's pass to the press, twisting survival into scandal and painting Madison as a naive pawn manipulated by a disgraced woman seeking redemption. A narrative so vicious it briefly threatens to swallow the truth whole, but instead of retreating, Madison does something no one expects. She goes public, not with accusations or vengeance, but with her story, standing before cameras with a composure that feels earned through fire, admitting what she knows, what she doesn't, and what was taken from her before she ever had a choice, a move that fractures public opinion and sends shockwaves through the very institutions that once relied on her silence. Claudette watches from the sidelines, pride and terror warring in her chest, because Madison's courage mirrors her own younger self, the version that once believed truth alone could protect her, and for the first time Claudette allows herself to hope that maybe this time will be different, that maybe the truth will land instead of ricochet, but hope proves fragile when retaliation escalates, when legal threats multiply, and when Madison receives a warning that is neither subtle nor anonymous, reminding her that power doesn't need to shout to be deadly. Nicole, caught between fear and fierce loyalty, finally chooses a side in a way she never has before, leveraging her own reputation and connections to protect Madison openly, even as it costs her dearly, a sacrifice that begins to heal the rift between them, not through forgiveness, but through shared risk, because nothing binds people faster than standing in the same line of fire. The community fractures along fault lines that were always there, old families circling the wagons while younger voices demand accountability, and Fairmont Crest begins to look less like a sanctuary and more like a battleground where legacy and truth collide in public view, culminating in a stunning confrontation at a town hall meeting meant to calm tensions, but instead ignites them. When Madison directly challenges the narrative of benevolence that has shielded her biological father for decades, stopping just short of naming him while making it clear that silence is no longer guaranteed, a calculated move that sends a clear message. The clock is ticking. Claudette, finally done running, steps forward beside her daughter in a moment that feels both terrifying and inevitable. Their united front rewriting the story that once cast them as mistakes to be hidden, and as they stand there together, two women forged by secrecy, loss, and resilience, it becomes clear that the real shock was never just who Madison's birth mother is, but what that truth unlocks, because in choosing each other over fear, they expose the fragile illusion holding Fairmont Crest together, proving that the most dangerous thing in a town built on silence isn't scandal. It's a woman who knows who she is, where she came from, and is no longer willing to disappear to make anyone else comfortable. And still the story refuses to release its grip, because after that town hall confrontation, Fairmont Crest enters a strange, brittle calm, the kind that always comes before something breaks, where smiles feel rehearsed, loyalties feel rented, and everyone senses that the final domino hasn't fallen yet, least of all Madison, who now lives in a state of heightened awareness, every knock at the door echoing louder than it should, every late-night call carrying the weight of threat or confession. And it's in this uneasy quiet that the truth begins to surface from the most unexpected places, as former allies of Madison's biological father start quietly reaching out, not out of remorse, but out of self-preservation, each offering fragments of proof, half-truths, and carefully hedged admissions that collectively paint a picture far darker than Madison ever imagined, revealing that Claudette's disappearance wasn't just a personal tragedy but a test case, the first successful erasure in a pattern repeated again and again whenever someone threatened to expose the machinery of power humming beneath Fairmont Crest's polished exterior. Claudette, confronted with evidence of how many others suffered after her, breaks down in a way Madison has never seen, not from weakness, but from the crushing realization that her silence didn't just save her daughter. It emboldened monsters, a truth that nearly sends her spiraling into guilt until Madison, steady now in a way that surprises even herself, reminds her that survival is not the same as consent, and that blaming herself only serves the people who benefited from her fear. The emotional tide shifts again when Madison's adoptive family becomes collateral damage, targeted by insinuations and audits designed to isolate Madison completely, a tactic that forces her to confront another painful truth. that the people who raised her are being punished simply for loving her, and in response Madison makes her boldest move yet, transferring assets, reshaping alliances, and using the very systems built to protect power against those who abused it, proving she has learned Fairmont Crest's language fluently enough to weaponize it. The tension reaches a near-breaking point when Claudette is subpoenaed, not as a witness, but as a suspect in a decades-old financial crime resurrected for the sole purpose of silencing her. A maneuver so transparent it enrages Madison beyond fear, and she retaliates by releasing a carefully curated timeline of evidence to a trusted journalist. Not the full truth, but enough to crack the dam, enough to force public scrutiny where secrecy once thrived, triggering investigations that powerful men can no longer quietly contain. As headlines explode and reputations tremble, Madison finally confronts her biological father again, this time not alone but armed with proof and purpose. And the encounter strips away his calm veneer, revealing panic beneath the polish as he realizes that the daughter he once erased has become the one variable he can no longer control, and in that moment Madison understands something vital, not just about him, but about herself. That power loses its grip the instant fear changes sides. The episode closes on an image that lingers long after the screen fades to black. Madison and Claudette standing together at the gates of Fairmont Crest, no longer asking permission to enter or remain, but deciding whether the place that shaped so much pain is worth saving it all, because the greatest shock of all isn't the revelation of Madison's birth mother. It's the irreversible truth that the daughter who was once hidden has become the force that might finally bring the entire illusion crashing down.